Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you on behalf of all the co-organizers, GFAN AP, Yoblan Institute, CISDI, and MAC, Malaysian AIDS Council, Malaysian AIDS Foundation, for joining us from across Asia Pacific and beyond. This is our second session in the Innovative Financing series, and today we'll be diving into Debt2Health from theory to action. My name is Jennifer Hope. I manage operation and program at GFAN AP, and I will be supporting with the facilitation today in today's conversation. Please know before we get started that we have Bahasa and Hindi translations available today. And so do go to the icon for interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom screen and select the language of your choice. A couple of quick reminder before we get started. This webinar is in English, but we also have interpretation in Bahasa and Indonesian and Hindi, so please make use of that. And to help run things smoothly, keep your mic muted and camera off. And if your internet feels a bit slow, try closing other apps on your phone, on your laptop, and feel free to drop comments and reflections in the public chat. We'd love to hear and see how you engage. This session is being recorded and will be shared later. And as always, GFAN AP is committed to keeping this space inclusive and safe for everyone. Next slide, please, Ken. So let's get started. And what are we here for today? So what we want to do is to build on the ideas from our very first webinar and see how financing innovation really plays out in practice. And we want to hear directly from Indonesia's Debt2Health journey. And we're very, very so honored to have somebody who was a pioneer in that join us today to share her experience and lessons from that with us. And we will also hear about the latest global conversation, including the recent Financing for Development conference and what that means for our region and our work around innovative financing in the region. And most importantly, we want to bring everyone together in one space so that we could learn from each other. So, yep. So did I jump the overview of the agenda? Sorry, let me see. Yeah, okay. So I think you can see our agenda for today and the speaker. So let's kick off our first speaker, which is Ms. Dia Saminarsi, the CEO and founder of CISDI. She's going to give us a quick recap of where we left off in webinar 1 and what it matters so much to bring country level experience into these conversations now. Dia, are you here with us?
Yes, I am.
Hi, welcome. So let me turn the floor over to you and take it away, please.
Okay. So an overview, thank you, Fahria. To recap the previous webinar, we categorize into context, typology, and some reflections and what we expect to look for as we move forward. As context, the declining ODA and debt burdens, a combination of that, debt burdens, climate pressure, has resulted in a financial or fiscal crisis for LMICs. And we also know that when we started when the global pandemic started, we also estimate or forecast that this type of situation where countries or especially LMICs will be short in their cash and also experience fiscal crisis, job crisis. We foresee that might be happening, but of course the recent decline of ODA just exacerbate this problem. The combined dynamics highlight the urgent need for new and innovative mechanism to be able to sustain health system. There is a tendency for governments around the world, in particular LMICs, to prioritize other more pressing issues rather than sustaining a health system, which entails, or which the consequence of that is actually longer term investment that is needed. We pinpoint that the range from voluntary contribution, traditional philanthropy and corporate partnerships, to more complex financial instruments, which we are going to discuss now. For example, the Debt2Health swaps and catalytic funding. Since the last 3 years or so, we have witnessed actually the emergence of philanthropic, different mechanism of philanthropic fundings. And then right now, I think this recent development and further restrictions on ODA make the philanthropy and corporate partnerships to be more creative in designing their financial instruments and support to development. Just recently, or right now, actually there is the AVPN conference global conference in Hong Kong, where family philanthropies and also various corporate entities are gathering, and they are discussing how to best support development in LMICs. Some key reflections from the previous webinar include that it's that innovative financing is not a substitute for ODA, and that the tool has, of course, strength and limitation. And what works for vaccine R&D might not work for other service delivery requirements in the longer term. And we look to move from global concept to more practical application at national and regional collaboration in the Asia Pacific region. Okay, next slide. The global trends and regional trends in health financing is as follows. So we can see that there is the global increasing trends globally for Debt2Health swaps, solidarity taxes, and blended financing. These have been discussed before, but right now the need to have them implemented is higher than ever. For Asia Pacific regions, it is highly relevant to be creative and to be innovative and explore the different categories in health financing, especially because this region also constitute of LMICs and have fiscal constraints at risk for climate change and etc. However, the key challenge is to translate the global concept that we are so used to into what will work at domestic, at national level, and what can be applied into domestic fiscal policy. We see that the trend from 2010 to 2022 as a steady growth. However, there is a 2023 collapse, the sharp decline, a 40% drop from 2022, and then further cuts can be expected from 2024 to 2027. The implication of this is, again, volatility of external health and its sustainability is questioned. It is imposing direct risk to progress of UHC, and the highest risk, of course, in reversing pandemic preparedness gains. Next slide. These are some examples of country-level experience. We highlight the example of Indonesia. I believe Ibu Lisa will speak more on that after this. Philippines, we know about the Syntax for Health. They are, in particular, very successful in Syntax for Health in their tobacco control to curb down tobacco, and they subsequently implement that for alcohol and sugary drinks as well. In Thailand, they have the Thai Health Promotion Foundation, also applying tobacco tax and alcohol tax, or sin tax as it is known. And it is successful because of a few things, because of the institutionalization and the constant support and the political will, the strong and constant political will, and the public support as well. Next, I believe that's the last one. And thank you again, colleagues, for gathering. I hope that this is enough to set the context of our webinar for today. And I hand the forum over to you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dia. Thank you for that comprehensive overview of the key lessons and sharing from our first webinar, and also for perfectly helping us set up the transition for our discussion from theory to practice today. And with great pleasure, I would like to invite Dr. Sifera Liza Munira, who is a health economist with more than 25 years of experience. And most importantly, she's also a pioneer of the world's first trilateral debt swap. She holds senior roles also with WHO, World Bank, Global Fund, and the Pandemic Fund. And she will be sharing insights from Indonesia's Debt2Health journey and what lessons we can draw for the Asia Pacific context. So, Lisa, over to you, and thank you for your being here today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Ibu Dia. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, perhaps as well, to everyone here. I'm very, very excited to be here to unpack Debt2Health and featuring Indonesia's experience with this model. I'm here as senior advisor to GLI, but also having being part of the Global Fund Innovative Financing team back in 2007 that developed the Debt2Health model. Also, having been part of the Ministry of Health of Indonesia, as well as a health economist scholar at the University of Indonesia. So I'd like to bring all of these hats to the session today. I'll be sharing a few slides briefly, and then would really like to have some interaction or discussion and feedback from folks here in the session. So I'd like to start with the basic question. If you could go to the next slide, of what is Debt2Health. So Debt2Health is basically a resource mobilization mechanism that is innovative because it unlocks the funding or resources that is already practically out there in the budget, because it deals with outstanding debt that is already existing and also meant to be serviced by countries. Now it's trilateral, and that already incorporates so a typical debt swap is between two countries, the debtor country and the creditor country. But this trilateral model involves a third party, which is the Global Fund. And that basically incorporates the how to use the funding once the debt swap arrangement is agreed upon. And this how to use the funding is quite challenging usually. And so this basically closes the loop of that process. Now, it also is arguably delivering a lower transaction cost in terms of the fact that it's part of, and it uses existing Global Fund mechanisms, which has rigorous standards of compliance and transparency. And many of you are familiar with the Global Fund model, where proposals coming in must or need to show that it's aligned with their national health strategies. This model is co-designed and or co-created, and I'll show that in the next couple of slides. Also, it's flexible in the sense that each individual agreement is negotiated individually. Therefore, this goes into the interest of the creditor government in terms of the discount rate applied as well as to the beneficiary country in terms of how the funds can be used, because it will be aligned to their proposals coming into the Global Fund. Next slide, please. So in the next slide, I'd like to share or try to answer the point about why debt swaps. So UN data shows that net interest payments on public debts in 2023 reached 847 billion US dollars. That's already a nearly 30% increase of what it was in 2021. Debts, of course, serve the purpose. It provides capital to countries, but over time, what we're finding is that servicing these debts have been burdening countries' budgets in terms of, the net interest payments are reaching levels far higher than what they're funding or spending on health and education. Next slide, please. And we can see that this is worse in some regions compared to others. And it's against this backdrop, basically, that the Debt2Health model was created, so that countries can mobilize resources that, by restructuring their debts in agreement, of course, with the creditor country, and also with that mobilizing resources into health. And as Ibu Dia had mentioned, as a recap from the previous webinar, if we look currently, there's additional pressure in finding new ways to mobilize resources innovatively. So especially due to the current global health situation and restricted ODA. Next slide. How does it work? So the way the Debt2Health of the Global Fund works is quite unique. The creditor country cancels an amount of outstanding debt upon the condition that the debtor country contributes a portion or 100% of that amount. So that becomes negotiable between the two countries. And that contribution goes to the Global Fund, where the Global Fund channels the funds back to the debtor country as additional grants for health. The funds also count as the creditor country's additional contribution to the Global Fund through Debt2Health. So it's a win-win-win situation where the Global Fund also has additional resources for, proposals coming in. We'll see that it has what they call unfunded quality demand. This is very important and unique. I'll show how that particular point is a very good development to how the Debt2Health model has progressed. So I would also mention that the Global Fund's role here, you can kind of say, is like a matchmaker. So the two countries have outstanding debt. They would show interest that they have, show interest to enter into a debt swap agreement, but typically each country wants to make sure that the other side is as interested and wants to know what terms and conditions are there on the table from both sides. So this is where the Global Fund's role is very important to make that happen, and also to then have that funding channeled into the Global Fund portfolio. Next slide. I'd like to share, this is a quick recap of since 2007 to currently, today, there's 14 transactions, Debt2Health transactions that have happened that involve 14 countries. Now, Indonesia has had 4 debt swap agreements in 2007, 2010, 2021, and 2024. It started, so the very first Debt2Health agreement was developed between Indonesia and Germany in 2007. And the very last one was in December 2024. If you look at the numbers here, you can see a couple of interesting points. One is that the health investment compared to the debt that's being canceled has changed or has progressed from what you would call a 50% discount rate. So of the debt canceled of 70 million US dollars, 50% of that, 35 million would then go into the debt swap, the global fund portfolio, global fund programs. And then fast forward to 2024, it's the full amount. So the 100% of that debt canceled goes into the global fund program. And you can also see that Indonesia's agreement is to date is the largest amount, which is at 75 million US dollars. And it's been used for a number of different programs, AIDS, TB, malaria, as well as health system strengthening. And the next slide, this shows how it has supported Indonesia's health programs, both, looking at TB case detection and notification and treatment. It's also been pushing that, as well as the significant decline in HIV/AIDS, malaria, as well as it's being in line, and it supports the current health system transformation agenda that the government is working on. Next slide. So a few lessons learned or a recap from Indonesia's experience. So I'd like to compare that very first model in 2007, or very first agreement, to the fourth or current agreement that Indonesia has had, which are both with Germany. In 2007, Indonesia was a lower middle income country compared to now, which is an upper middle income country. For middle income countries, the signaling of debt distress, this is quite insightful actually, that the signaling of debt distress is a big deal. So if in 2007, Indonesia had a debt swap task force because it was looking to restructure its debts, and the findings of that, so Indonesia's agreement with the Global Fund and Germany, so that the creation of that model, the creation of the Debt2Health model was developed alongside the process of the first deal. And so when we discovered that there was a debt swap task force in Indonesia, we had 4 pilot countries back then. It was Indonesia, Pakistan, Peru, and Kenya. What we found was that these other 3 countries, which were also developing countries, also had debt swap task forces, which were housed in the Coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs, or the equivalent of that in these countries. And in creating this model back in 2007, the team consulted with basically everyone in the government, in civil society. We spoke to the parliament, president's office, just to understand, 1, the appetite, 2, what model was interesting for Indonesia, and also to understand how we could make this deal happen. Because it was a pilot, interesting enough, we started with a seed grant funding that came from the Gates Foundation. And so we would also often reflect that what happened in that first year was we were able to turn a $1 million US seed funding into a 400 million commitment from Germany at the time. So that was quite interesting. The 1-to-2 ratio is the 50% discount that I referred to. Some governments refer it to the ratio. So that happened in 2007, but now it's quite different. It's 100%. When it was 50%, you could imagine that it created fiscal space as well for countries. And Indonesia, now being an upper middle income country, is confident to have this 100% or 0% discount rate, right? because it was already the fourth deal, there's already identified counterparts. There is no longer a debt swap task force in Indonesia. And in 2007, when we were creating this first model, it was very, one of the things that was taking place in the discussion was how would we then use the agreed upon amount for programs that both Indonesia and Germany were agreeable to. And so I believe the implementation of that first deal took a while because at that time, the Global Fund did not yet have this unfunded quality demand. It does now, and what that is, for those of you that might not be familiar, but I believe most of you are already familiar with it, it's where countries put in a proposal. I'm just going to make up a number, let's say 300 million, where all of this, let's say the 300 million has already gone through the technical review panel. It's already been vetted for, but because of existing funding and so on, a number of different considerations, that country gets 200 million, for instance. So there's 100 million remaining that is of high quality, but it's not funded. And with this current model, with this current aspect, the Debt2Health agreement unlocks that portion of the proposal. And so, that obviously makes the process much more clear and also faster. So I understand that fourth Debt2Health swap that Indonesia had was, the implementation was much faster. So next slide and my very last slide, I believe, is that this is just a reflection of any future innovative financing mechanisms. One is that it needs to serve a solution to specific problems. I understand from the previous webinar, it was looking at previous current innovative financing mechanisms. It's always about understanding where the pain points are. And I believe that innovative financing mechanisms are there to address that particular pain point. For vaccines, for instance, it's a lot to do with front loading because, vaccine production, vaccine mechanism of the, programs, etc. Sorry, the production of vaccines require a lot of capital. So that suits vaccines. But in this case, for instance, it's really about unlocking resources and in a sense, adding on to the budget without having to deep further into or argue for more funding from the budget. And so there's other programs or other innovative financing models that really are there to address specific pain points or specific issues. And then the second thing here is that it's most effective and efficient to use existing mechanisms where possible. So the Debt2Health model basically twins the point about a debt swap arrangement that already happens with the Global Fund mechanism. One interesting point just to add is that when we were discussing with countries, we were asking, we had comments initially about, oh, we've done debt swaps before. It's not really interesting because usually the beneficiary country has to implement certain programs and then the debt gets canceled. So then we understood that upfront cancellation was very important for countries, for beneficiary countries, and for Indonesia in that case. And this has actually set a standard for Indonesia's debt swap arrangement, but also the Global Fund Debt2Health model. And then third last point is to find champions. So as we consulted with the many stakeholders in the country, we found policy champions, advocates that were visionary and really helped guide that process of making the arrangement happen. And what we're also finding is that the Indonesian model has also been relevant to other countries that are looking into finalizing a deal, or also to start discussions around debt-to-health models. So I'll end here. So I'll last slide, I think, is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for making Debt2Health something more tangible and real. I think for me, at least, but I believe also for many of us here on the call today, to grasp and also for inspiring us to really look at debt swap as a potential financing model for our respective country when it comes to creating a bigger physical space for health. I'm still slightly hung up by Global Fund is like a marriage matchmaker at the very early on of your presentation, but I will keep that, I'll have that in my mind. So I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions for Lisa already at this point, but I would like to ask you to please hold on to your questions or drop your questions in the chat box. I see a couple already to drop in the chat box for now. We have one more sharing from Rafael Garcia, the portfolio manager at JLI Center for Global Health Diplomacy. Rafael will bring us fresh insights from the fourth international conference on financing and development in civil back in July, and help us reflect and connect into Lisa's presentation on the conversation there, and also the different implications for global health and equity financing. So Rafael, let me turn the floor over to you. Do you have presentation to PPT to share as well?
No, I don't have a presentation. I have here some bullets and thoughts that I will be sharing with you. But thank you very much for the opportunity. I know that probably there are a lot of questions for Lisa, so I will try to be super quick on what happened in Seville at the 54, and at the same time zoom a little bit on what we heard, what we saw there on debt swaps, and show you also how this is connected to Lisa's excellent presentation. So FFD4 was actually a bit more than 2 months ago. It was from June 30 to July 3rd in Sevilla, Spain. And right now, I think it feels like it was a long time ago. I think, like right now we're living at this moment of rapid changes. And I think right now it has become a little bit harder, to spot the trends, and especially also like the good news that are happening. I think we're flooded by these pessimistic news and like all of these chaotic changes and stuff. But I think for me, Seville was really a space where it was a bit of a good moment. And I want to convey today like a more optimistic view of FFD4. However, it's still critical of what it was, because well, the conference did not deliver at the scale that it is needed to really accelerate and meet the development and climate goals. I think it was still a space where there were efforts from many different governments and also from many other stakeholders from civil society and the private sector. And I think this was seen very much by or this became tangible by looking at the many different little announcements that happen on the sidelines of FFD4, and also by the very rich discussions that we had there in Seville. We really address a multiplicity of issues. There were discussions on ODAs, on taxation, on private sector engagement, on innovative financing. And I think that really showed that we do have options and we do have paths to reach financing at the scale that is needed. And one of the key, we could say, or one of the highlights of FFD4 is what is called the Sevilla Platform for Action. And this was actually a mechanism that the Spanish government put in place to encourage countries and also countries to partner with other actors to put forward additional commitments beyond what was in the official outcome document. And I will share this in the link in the chat in a bit. But there were commitments on a very broad array of issues. There are, for example, on taxation, you will find commitments related to pushing for health taxes. A lot of them refer to like sin taxes, the taxation of tobacco, of alcohol, and other substances. There's also a lot of talk about the solidarity levies and how countries could like put new taxes for aviation, for ultra wealthy individuals. But there were also good discussions on like broader taxation reforms effort. A lot, of course, at the domestic level, but I think it's also worth noting that there's actually a push for a UN convention on taxation that I think us as health advocates should be looking very closely and actually try to get more engaged. There was also a lot of discussion on data, on transparency, on the governance of our of financing. So, for example, one of the very good discussions was around country platforms. Having these mechanisms that really put countries at the driving seat, where countries can better organize and visualize the needs that they have, and that donors, philanthropies, they have a better entry points to know what needs to be funded and avoid duplication. There were also about discussions on how do we measure progress beyond GDP, a lot of financial transparency, illegal financial flows. Of course, a lot of discussion on private sector engagement and these mechanisms that we have heard before, blended financing, impact investing. And on the side of debt, which we can address it from different angles, we saw a lot, of course, on debt swaps. Debt swaps as a mechanism that is practical, that can mobilize resources easily in the short term, but also discussions on the medium to long term needs for reforming debt. There were discussions, for example, on the cost of capital and how do we really need to have better assessments of risk so that countries are actually borrowing not as expensive as they are, particularly in Africa, but also happening in other regions. There were also discussions on debt suspension clauses, which are this is mechanism that in case of, for example, a health emergency or a climate disaster, there would be suspension of debt, so that could like free resources for governments to invest where it's needed. So it was really like a very dynamic space. And in the end, even though we do not have this major one single agreement or announcement, we do have different announcement and different partnerships and commitments on the table. And I think that shows that we really have to, it's time to continue, it's time to be pragmatic. Multilateralism is alive. Countries are still on the table trying to find solutions, and we should not be blinded by the whole drama of some countries, and that they are pushing for polarization. I think there are many more that are still sitting on the table trying to push for agreements, for multilateralism. And us as advocates, it's also like the time to push for more partnership, for more solidarity. I think we should be connected to other activists on the climate, environment, nutrition spaces, because they're also trying to find money. And if they find ways to find money, it's also examples that we can use in our own work to push for reaching the right level of financing to finance our health systems, pandemic preparedness and response, fight HIV, tuberculosis, and malaria. So we really have a solid base, and that I think came up from FFD4. And just zooming into debt swaps, I think it's very interesting that one of the commitments that emerged is actually the establishment of a hub, the debt swaps hub that the Spanish government and many others have established, and that is intended to provide technical support, capacity building for governments to better understand how they can move ahead with debt swaps. And I think as Lisa mentioned, this is a pragmatic tool that really we can rely on. And I think really sharing the country experiences and bringing more people on board will also help ease the way we can conduct these kind of transactions, reduce the costs that are associated with debt swap, and also help convey the right level or help convey the right message that these are actually tools that do not signal debt distress, but actually that are good for putting resources where fiscal resources cannot reach at this time, but where investment is needed. So I'll stop here, and of course I'm happy to also share any other questions either here or on the chat. And if you still want to talk more about F54, feel free to reach out to my email, which I will also share in the chat. So over to you, Jen and Lisa. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Rafael. You're not off the hook because some of the questions might be for you later. But just, time to be pragmatic and then to push for more solidarity and unity. Thank you for those key messages. And we'll come back to those at closing. So, all right, we're slightly behind schedule, but I hope people will be able to stay with us maybe for another 10, 15 minutes past the hour. We have heard some really inspiring ideas and thought-provoking input. And like today's session, I hope we'll be able to, and it's our intent to bring more of those other models that Rafael have also mentioned, and also country experiences like the case of Indonesia to our webinar, and including follow-up on the development of Debt Swap Hub. That sounds really interesting. So we're going to move into our Q&A session, and I would like to invite Hayan Chan, the Deputy Director of Malaysian AIDS Council, to help us facilitate. Again, please do drop your question in the chat or raise your hand, and let's keep this space open, interactive, and respectful. So Hayan, over to you. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Lisa and Rafael, for the update. I think Ibu Lisa, your presentation is really an interesting one, and to some, I think it could be very new. And I think I have tried to, from the chat, I think I gathered 3 to 4 questions over here. Probably I will start off with the first one, which is a bit general. The question from Louise will be, is there any target list of countries for this Debt2Health model at the moment? And how many global fund donors countries could be encouraged to use this model besides Germany and Australia? And also many countries have loans from China. So are there any discussion so far on advocacy with China on Debt2Health model? Yeah. Over, Ibu Lisa.
Thank you, Anya. I think perhaps the Global Fund would be best to respond to that, but I can mention generally that because it's working around the outstanding debt, it's really looking at perhaps creditor countries, what outstanding debts do they have and with which countries, and then where would these beneficiary countries or debtor countries have interest to then, arrange a debt swap model under a Debt2Health mechanism. The point also is that the Debt2Health mechanism requires debtor countries that have funding to repay their outstanding debt, and this is why, in a sense, it signals that it's not signaling that there is debt distress, if that makes any sense. So and this is where that matchmaking arrangement, I would say, kicks in that role from of the Global Fund. With the slide that I had shared previously, that there is already a number of countries that have taken up this arrangement. There's 3 creditor countries. Maybe Rafael can share a bit more in terms of other countries that will come in as creditors or potential creditors. And I believe the Debt Swap Hub would be very, very important and useful there. In terms of the beneficiary countries, I believe there's already 11 beneficiary countries that have taken up the model. I'm sure, if we expand, there would be a potential lists of other countries. In terms of
Right.
China, I understand that China has expressed interest. Perhaps that's still in the making. Maybe bridging in a little bit to some of the questions in the comments. I think there's two what would you call hurdle or points that usually you can notice from all these processes. One is that this sort of starter point. So if you look at if maybe if we could show the slide again, I think it's slide number 6. So when countries enter into the debt-to-health model, if you look at it, they either start with a lower amount or they start with a 50% discount rate and then progress. And that was also obviously the case for Indonesia. And then the other thing is there was a question about the signaling of debt
Ratio.
distress and
I think,
yeah,
yeah.
the ratio, exactly. And so that ratio, if you look at Indonesia's case, it actually, moved from a 50% to the full amount. And so this is perhaps two important points that countries consider when they start or discuss and also close the agreement itself. So I'll pause here.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Lisa. It seems like a lot of active follow-up apart from the Indonesia success story. I think that's something really make us look forward to see what will happen in the next few years to come. And back to the question then, a bit more technical. I think you might already answer a little bit of that, Lisa, earlier. It's on the I think it's on the debt signaling. Just so on. I don't know why the questions is missing. So on debt signaling, is there what is your sense that in general is it less than of an issue today than when the Debt2Health work started in Indonesia, or is just less of an issue for Indonesia, but still a concern for a lot of other countries?
So when we talk about signaling debt distress, that I believe very much is aligned with a country's rating, right? Standard & Poor's and their bonds, etc. And so for a country for an emerging economy like Indonesia, and have now being an upper middle income country, these ratings matter a lot, right? So that's where the concern of not signaling debt distress becomes an issue. Obviously, Debt2Health or a debt swap does not fix the debt problem of countries. So, but there are other forums, there are other mechanisms for that. So this, I believe, is really addressing the debt restructuring of countries that are in the middle income level, and for them, not signaling debt distress is of importance. So as Indonesia progresses, its economic level has progressed. That's how it has that point has become more important for it. I would also perhaps mention that even though it's between two countries, within the country level, so say in Indonesia's government, there's at least two entities that are involved. One is the finance ministry that makes these negotiations, let's say, with the creditor country, but then of course the health sector aspect, right? So the Ministry of Health and the CCM, etc. But between the governments, it's the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Finance. And so it's like the country negotiation is represented by the Finance Ministry, and the Health Ministry becomes, in a sense, advocate, of how important this the debt to health then translates into programs in the country.
Right. Thank you, Ibu Lisa, for that. And I think another questions, technical questions on the ratio, debt to health ratio. I think you mentioned a little bit on that. The question from Tabitha is there a general trend of a one-on-one ratio in the upper middle income countries and the lower ratios for the lower income countries level? Or does it tend to be more country to country, kind of a specific ratio being set between the countries over?
I think there's obviously a mix. There's not a fixed rule, but if you look at the trend, and maybe Rafael, you can add to this, more and more. So each agreement is negotiated individually, right? So it's really up to the negotiation that takes place. But if we look at the trend, there's more and more one-to-one ratio taking place. And I'm looking at the numbers now, and you can see that in terms of the size of the deals as well. Some countries, and I think, we have Mongolia here that already has a one-to-one agreement. Its agreement is also a one-to-one ratio, as is Sri Lanka, both countries with Germany, but Mongolia's arrangement is almost twice of Sri Lanka. So there's a different number of components, terms and conditions, let's say, that goes in there.
Right. Okay. And Ibu Lisa, there's a question from Mona. Does the creditor's country shows in their funding analysis in the upfront to the CCM member depth, or else is the government monitor that and have authority to reinvest? Yeah.
Could you try to find the?
Yeah, that's 451, Mona Balani. Yeah.
To the CCM debt, or else is it? I believe that the creditor country states its commitment to debt to health as a full amount to Global Fund, and then the individual debt to health agreements take place. If we look at that $400 million commitment that Germany had, it was the deals that happened from there were Germany, Indonesia, Germany, Pakistan, Germany, Cote d'Ivoire, Germany, Egypt, which then amounted to, let's say, I haven't added up these all up, but which would add up to Germany's commitment. And we understand that Germany has now stated, new commitment for debt to health. And so under that arrangement or agreement would those individual debt swaps take place. The CCM, so when, as it's twinning between this debt swap model and the Global Fund model, which is, I think, very, very unique and very important, that the typical and established Global Fund proposal mechanism, which involves CCM, which involves all the different the technical review panel, all those compliances and standard standards are there. This matches very neatly and nicely, so that the health investment that comes from the debt cancellation is already vetted for and is part and aligned with the National Health Strategy.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. And I heard so many countries still are coming up in the Germany list. I think that is something good to hear. And we hope that we definitely will see a more positive outcome from there. And maybe for the interest of time, thank you, Ibu Lisa. I think the last question, we take the last question for Rafael. The question is that how can the principles of trustworthy artificial intelligence can be integrated into the Debt2Health mechanism to enhance transparency and accountability, ensuring the funds converted from the debt are utilized effectively and equitably in global health initiative. Maybe Ibu Lisa, you can comment that as well after Rafael. I think that will be interesting to hear your comment. Yeah, AI and Debt2Health. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I must say that it's something that I had thought before, but I think probably there might be some potential to integrate artificial intelligence in like the analysis of debt swap, like identify how transaction costs could become more affordable. But I think what's already powerful of the Debt2Health mechanism is that accountability coming itself from these proposals being actually coming from the country coordinating mechanism. Like we are not just the debt that is canceled and just not going to fund any project randomly, but it goes to fund projects and initiatives that have already been identified, that have already been vetted through the Global Fund process. And it just uses the existing channels that actually already have a lot of accountability and compliance monitoring that involve communities and civil society. And they just make sure that these resources exactly that are being added to the available funds of a country, they just flow to the established mechanisms without adding new layers of complexity and accountability. And so I think that's what's the benefit of the debt swaps through the Global Fund, the Debt2Health mechanism. So I don't know, Lisa, if you would like to.
I mean, I echo Rafael's comment about the importance of CCM and how they can also use artificial intelligence and data, because Debt2Health basically it only works if it's country owned. The alignment with national health strategies, but also that it's rooted in community realities, right? Because it's not only about being a fiscal instrument. It really needs to be a mechanism that transforms outstanding debt into tangible investments, medicines and clinics, salaries for health workers, lives saved today. And so the community-led monitoring, global fund mechanisms already identify where these gaps are. And it's this data that can then show, where debt swap funds go, how we can leverage that, how it can be catalyzed, and so on. And so I think as the global fund mechanism optimizes AI for its processes, the Debt2Health arrangement can only benefit from that, I believe, together with communities and civil societies here, of course. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ibu Lisa and Rafael, for some of this comment. I think on the interest of time, probably I will close the Q&A sessions over here. And thank you so much for the speakers, for the comment, and pass it back to Jennifer. Thanks, Jennifer. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Hayan, for facilitating that for us, and also to Lisa and Rafael again for your insight and sharing. I acknowledge that there are additional comments and questions in the chat that we didn't get to discuss extensively, but just to note that our intent is to look at different potential models, and debt swap is just one of the models that we're hoping to get where we're talking about, and it might not be the right one for every country. Our intent for the webinar series is to create opportunities that we're having today to learn about other country experience and to continue our conversation and learning as well. So without further ado, actually, thank you all for
Thank you everyone for joining us and staying on. Thank you so much for the interpreters and also the co-organizers and to Jen and our colleagues, Ken, as well as Lisa and the speakers for a really great presentation and for really, really engaging discussions. I think that the main objective that we have around this is that we understand that this is a time that we're facing as against the backdrop of really huge ODA cuts, and attention is increasingly turning towards looking at alternative funding modalities that could help bridge the gap between the growing need and the shrinking budgets that are allocated to cooperation. So Debt2Health is one of very promising instruments, and Germany has been one of the countries that has been really in the forefront, along with Australia, around the Debt2Health swaps. We hope that it's one of the tools that can help to mobilize domestic resources, be able to ease debt burdens and safeguard progress in global health. Against this backdrop, I would like to also share that we're requesting our colleagues to please sign on to an international sign-on letter that we are putting to Germany for them to increase their pledge commitment to the Global Fund. So Ken, could you please drop that link in the chat box? And there will be a session that will be held in Germany at the World Health Summit around Debt2Health, that we would be very, very happy to share more information with you afterwards. So the link is now in the chat box. Please do sign on to a letter. We're looking for only one organization to sign on for the letter, and this is specifically targeted to Germany. Please do share this broadly also with your colleagues. So without further ado, thank you all for staying on, and we're going to be looking forward to you joining us again for our next series very soon. Thank you, Raphael. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Han Yong, and Jennifer, Ken, and also our other speakers and the interpreters. Have a very pleasant evening.